Hello everyone and anyone unfortunate enough to have stumbled onto this video. I am Philiqui and I'm here to give my thoughts on a game I decided to try on a whim because it sounded like Solstice, as in summer solstice. To my disappointment, this game has nothing to do with either the summer or winter solstice. Instead of getting a game dealing with the astronomical alignment of the Earth to the Sun, I got a dark fantasy game about two sisters. In retrospect, I should have taken the images on the Steam page much more seriously, as in, I should have actually paid attention to them. We live and learn. We live and learn. Alright, well, the first thing to get out of the way about this game is that it's pretty well assembled. What I mean is that the developers did a good job at presenting a technically sound game that provides engaging combat, an interesting story, and a decent environmental atmosphere, or a decent atmosphere created with the environment. I say engaging combat because the game makes you decide to either pay attention to what is happening during a combat situation or lose valuable potions or aids, or worse yet, simply die. As in any game, the level of difficulty will affect how much you really have to focus on any given combat scenario, but even at the lower difficulties, the game does have you work against the clock and provides bonuses that are intended to work as incentives to make you want to get a high score. Or you can be like me and just fumble your way through the entirety of the game, not paying much attention to the clock or the score. Most of the RPGs that I have played have what I would describe as a serviceable story. That is, they serve the purpose of advancing the game through a narrative backdrop. Instead of being one random combat scenario after another, there is a narrative in place that provides some cohesion from one scenario to the next. Soulstice does a slightly better job than that with its narrative. The combat situations arise in concert with the narrative, which gives the game a nice flow from one combat situation to the next. However, I am not a big fan of putting a timer on each chapter that you have to get through. I am okay and I get a timer on the combat scenarios, but I prefer exploration over finishing quickly. Admittedly, it appears that this was part of the developer's goal to add a sense of haste and urgency to the game, as it is supposed to all take place within the span of a day. So, unless you decide you're just going to ignore the clock, as I did, the moment you start a chapter, you have to pretty much be engaged and focused to the very end of that chapter. Again, if you ignore the clock and care about scoring high on the chapter, or if you don't want to ignore the clock and actually care about scoring high on the chapter. This is a bit of a shame, as a slower pace might have added to the grim atmosphere that the game has going on. It's not all that unique, and some might point out that the whole grim and dark tone of the game is, I suppose, common at this point, but that is because when it is done well, this kind of environment, tone, and atmosphere works great with games that want to challenge the player and make them feel like they are in a desperate fight for their survival. A few games that pull this off exceptionally well come to mind, but no need to speak of the obvious. It suffices to say that while the game's environment and atmosphere are commonly treaded ground, it treads those grounds well enough to provide just enough deviation from other games to set itself apart. Doing what has worked in the past, at least in and of itself, is not a negative, just like doing something new in and of itself is not a positive. This holds very much true for game worlds, especially in this case. On a bit of a more technical note, I wasn't all that fond of the whole monsters just different appearing in just different combinations in each chapter approach. The game, what I mean is the game essentially throws the same monsters at you after the customary initial introduction of each monster. You'll see them over and over again. The game is not long enough for this to be a severe detriment, but it is long enough to the point where I got a little underwhelmed dealing with the same bosses. One time, of course, two, okay, three, 4 times, and you have to tell the monsters that it's been nice, but we really should see other people. However, I did mean what I said about the game being assembled well. While I wasn't fond of the reuse, they did tie it into the story and why they would reappear as they do. Nevertheless, it makes it no less underwhelming. The main, I suppose, villain is the appropriate term, were, if nothing else, unique. I can't remember the last time I had to fight a giant head with a monstrous center, but then again, I can't remember much, on account of jumping off bookshelves when I was younger. The doctor said I would be okay, but he did express fear to my mother that the stupid might be terminal. Anyway, the final boss fight was underwhelming, in part because of the narrative build-up and the combat gameplay involved. As I said earlier, I have no problem with games doing what has already worked, but the whole final boss losing control and unleashing all his, or more appropriately in this case, her power is something I imagine anyone that has played enough ARPGs or even RPGs to give Soulstice a try has seen plenty of times before. You can only be fascinated by the floating blue turtles so many times before the fascination is gone, and this is my attempt at an illusion. But what am I alluding to? The world may never know, which does make it a weak illusion. Huh. Oh well. What am I doing? All right, Soulstone. Okay. One of the central features of this game is the rapture mode, which basically increases your speed, damage, and allows you to ignore having to switch between the blue and red spheres, which you would normally have to do to defeat specific enemies. In fact, it's not a stretch to say that in each combat scenario, you're basically working towards trying to activate rapture mode. Not that you can't win without it, it just makes it so much easier when you do activate it. Activating it isn't all that hard. You just have to string a few combos together without being hit, which just boils down to you pressing the B button at the right time and having Lute, the younger sister that serves as the spiritual aid to Briar, which I pretty much see as the main character, launch a defensive maneuver. I did like that you're essentially controlling both sisters for most of the game, and that Lute is not just a useless companion there for show and needless commentary. They do work in tandem with each other, and it does kind of feel that you're in control of both simultaneously. So I'll wrap it up by saying that I enjoyed the game, even though I had more than a few moments of frustration with it. And that was entirely on me, as I played the game on the highest difficulty that you could play before you have to beat the game to go higher, which is weird because I never intended to play the game more than once. So not sure what I was hoping to accomplish with that, but I accomplished it, I think. Or maybe not. Okay, well, after having played this game, I felt drawn away from the ARPG genre, and it's not so much because the game pushed me away from it, more that my fingers hurt. These kind of games are a literal pain to play when you have arthritis in your fingers, like I do. Nevertheless, I think it is a pretty good sign that the game did something right if someone with arthritis, me per se, in the fingers, was interested enough to keep playing through the game even if it was only once. All right, so putting a number on this game places it at a 3.5 somewhere. All right, so putting a number on this game places it at I guess, well, 3.5. It is entertaining, and I would even say it's a good action RPG, but there was nothing that really made it stand out from any of the other good ARPGs already available. If you have the money, you like ARPGs, then I see no reason that this shouldn't be in your library. But if you, like me, are more selective about the games you buy, for a number of reasons, I can't say Solstice would be my first or second choice for an ARPG if that was what I was looking to play. But I can't say that I'm disappointed with having purchased the game either. So 3.5 seems fair. That's pretty much all I have to say about this game. Although one last thing worth noting, at the conclusion of the game, it does a teaser for a second installment, a potential second installment. A rather bold move, but I can see myself picking up a second installment in this series now that I've already played the first, or in this potential series. I am curious enough about the narrative and where they're taking it to see if that man that was dressed in what appeared to be some sort of Greek armor meant anything. I know it's going to sound just like a random pull from the game, but it was something that kind of got me, and it made me feel that maybe there's more to the story. Maybe they do have a grand idea about how they want to tie this story, or what they want to make of this story. Or it could just be a model that they had lying around that they inserted to add meaningless mystery to a otherwise pretty short game. Anyway, that's it for me. Till next time.